Honor to be here, and I'm just delighted that the Reverend Meigs Ross is back with us again. She did a wonderful session. When was it? In April. I was going to say it was in the summer. I have no idea. Time is just weird. On grief and loss. And this time we'll be talking about Sabbath, which is wonderful. She is a psychotherapist in private practice in New York City. She works with individuals, couples, families, and groups using a systems-centered approach. She's also an adjunct professor at Union Theological Seminary and a certified pastoral educator with the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, CPE, and a clergy coach. She's a priest associated with Grace Church in Nyack. So she's got a wealth of experience, and she's also just a good person to know in case you need someone in the future or you know someone who needs someone in the future. So it's good to get to know her. So God bless you, Meg, and prayers for what you share with us right now.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki. I appreciate that. And it's really lovely to be here with all of you. And as you read off the things that I have done, or it shows my age. I've had a lot of time to do all those things. And I've clearly needed some Sabbath along the way. But the first thing I wanted to say is that I'm not here talking about Sabbath because I'm an expert. It is something that I continue to learn about. But I can tell you that one of the things, the people that are teaching me about the importance of Sabbath are the people that I know who have done it really well and have just really sustained themselves in ministry, lay ministry, clergy, for years, and those who have not done it well. And I have journeyed with some of them and seen the struggles when people don't make time for Sabbath, don't really, wait a second, I lost the view of all of you. There we go. I'm sorry. So I know of being with people who have not done Sabbath well and those who have. Okay. So why is it important? And I want us to get to that. I want us to talk about what Sabbath is, about what Sabbath can mean for all of us, about what moves us toward really creating a life that has a Sabbath in it and what gets in the way. And I want plenty of time for discussion. As I look around the room, I know that all of you have experiences here to share, and we can learn from one another. And I also want to say that I'm not coming at it tonight as a theologian, although I will share some thoughts, that's something we can also do together, is really think about our theology of Sabbath. But I can tell you, before we begin, I want to tell you of two people who've really taught me about Sabbath. Kind of start with a bit of a narrative. So one is a colleague of mine who's a rabbi. And she is a conservative rabbi, very gifted, works extremely hard, extremely well educated, creates programs, preaches, does you name it, is just top of her field, right? And she is someone who holds completely tightly to the Jewish Sabbath. When sundown Friday night comes, she lights candles, has a meal with her family. Saturday, she walks to synagogue. She doesn't ride in a car or take a bus. She doesn't turn on the stove. She doesn't turn on her computer. If she has work to do, it is left undone. She has a day of visiting and reading and rejoicing in God. And then when the sun goes down Sunday night, her Sabbath is over and the work begins. But it is completely, as we know, countercultural to take a full day, sundown to sundown. And yet she gets more work done and has more joy in her work than just about anybody I know. So that is one image of Sabbath. Now I want to share a very different one. When Vicki was asking me about introducing me, she said, should I say anything about the Adirondacks? Because I grew up there and I love the Adirondacks. And I said, don't worry, I'll bring it in somewhere. So it turns out I'm bringing it in right at the beginning. I grew up in a mill town, teeny little mill town up in the Adirondacks. My home was a mile from the mill. And my father was one of the engineers at the mill. And he loved his work. He was also a lay minister in the church. He went to work every single day, 7 days a week. He came home for dinner at night, and he went back at night. And you're saying, well, that sounds like he needs to learn something about Sabbath. No. He knew how to work and how to have Sabbath and have a rhythm throughout the day and the week. So when he came home at night, he was able to come home for lunch. He came home and had lunch with my mother every day and rested in the middle of the day. He came home at evening and had dinner with his family, completely present. Went back to work for a little bit. Came home, rested. Completely rested and revived. Sunday morning was, he went to work really early so he could get to church. And Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning he went to work. But Saturday afternoon was, you took a hike. You got out into the woods. You spent time with your family, time with your friends. Sunday after church, time in the woods, time with your family. So here's an example of someone, my colleague who's a rabbi, who took a full day of Sabbath. And then here's an example of my father, who worked 7 days a week, but knew how to work and let it go and rest, and knew how to really connect his work with his faith, so that he knew when he was resting in God, and when he was working, he was doing the work that God set out for him. So he had a Sabbath built into his day and into his week. So I had two really good examples of Sabbath. And as I said, I'm not an expert here, but I wanted to share as we think about Sabbath, that there are many, many different ways to do this. So that's the first thing I want to just point out. And then I want to share, I'll be talking for a little bit here, and then I want to hear from you all. But I think about Sabbath is time to rest and to be renewed so that we can go back into the fields to work. And thinking about Sabbath as both a command and a gift. Right? It's a fourth commandment. You will keep the Sabbath holy. It's not God said, hey, maybe you ought to think about this. It's one of the 10 commandments. And it's also a gift. I want to, as I was doing some research or thinking about this, what I came across was this beautiful verse, which I don't even remember reading, from Psalm 127, verse 2. I want to share it with you. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for God gives sleep to his beloved. So I want to read that again. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for God gives sleep to his beloved. So God gives sleep because God loves us. God wants us to rest, not to be caught up in this anxious toil. And so we have this gift, we have this command, we have this joyous offering from God to us. Rest. Take the time that you need. That's what I want for you. So we really can't ignore Sabbath and survive. We can't ignore Sabbath and have a full sustained life in ministry. I just don't believe we can. I've seen too many times when it can't be. And usually it's when we need Sabbath the most that we say, not now. I have too much to do. That's probably the times that we need it the most. So you're hearing a little bit about how I understand it. So that I want us to think about this idea of Sabbath as a commandment and Sabbath as a gift. And in many traditions, Sabbath is seen as a little taste of heaven. I love that idea. If we could see taking a rest, taking a pause in our busy days as a taste of heaven, what in the world would keep us from that, right? And as we know, many things keep us from that. But why would we? So as we talk tonight, I do not want at all to forget that we are in the context of a pandemic. 10 months now. Life is not as usual. So some of you may be working harder than ever. Some of you may have your schedules completely turned upside down. Some of you may be having more time that you don't know what to do with. I'm sure all of us have all of that at times, but we know it's not business as usual. So on the one hand, I want to think about what does Sabbath mean when it's not business as usual? And the other hand, I want to think about what does it mean to put a practice in our life that we do, whether it's business or usual or not, because it is that rhythm of a life of rest and prayer and work that sustains us and becomes the usual, whatever is going on in the world. So I wanted to think about that. And then the other piece I want to bring in is that as we think about Sabbath, this is really countercultural to the culture we live in, is it not? I mean, I don't know if you know the phrase now that's being used, like total work culture. That's what we live in, total work culture. Right? I mean, I've talked to folks who say, they're at work they go to work for hours on end, and their boss tells them, I want you to be available by email or text from 6 a.m. to midnight. Okay, so you get 6 hours for sleep. Now, we in ministry could say, oh, well, we're available 24/7. Okay, we're going to have to think about how we'd have Sabbath if we're truly available 24/7, right? Okay, so we will be thinking about boundaries, expectations, all of those things. Okay, so that's kind of the context I want us to set as we're thinking about Sabbath. The commandment, a gift, but there are many, many different ways to do this. And certainly Jesus was a wonderful model, right? Let us go into the desert. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest, Mark 6:31. So many times in the middle of struggle, Jesus went and rested. All right, so let's think about then this idea of resting and Sabbath in ministry. That leadership, as we know, requires incredible energy. And if we're going to expend energy, we have to recharge. So this is where I see people getting in trouble with their health when they don't recharge. Right? And do you know the difference? I'm sure you do. When you see a leader who is rested and has had a Sabbath, and a leader who hasn't. Right? Now, a leader who's rested can be fully present to you. No matter what you bring to them, they're present, they're not hurried, kind of in charge, they're relaxed, can think straight. Probably things are going pretty well for them in their relationships, you hope. And what do you see when you would go to a minister or leader who has not had a Sabbath, who is exhausted? You see someone who can't pay attention to you, right? Who has a million things going on, none of them quite getting done, who's frazzled, who may need more attention from you than they're able to give to you. Right? We know the difference, right? And we've all been both. We've been that leader that's rested and ready to go, and the leader that's frazzled. People say, how are you doing, Meigs? So often my answer is, oh, I'm busy. Oh, I'm so busy. And I begin to think, do I have something that I think being busy says that I'm doing well in life? Ah, you're busy. That's good. That's our highest goal. Right? Wonder if I said, I'm really well rested. I've had my Sabbath. I'm good with God. Wow. People wouldn't probably know who I was. So I'm going to learn from this. Okay. So, and we also want to think about what is realistic for us and how each one of us here, if we really thought about what we need, that it's going to be different. I couldn't say to you, this is what you need to do to make Sabbath work for you. You couldn't tell me. We have to figure it out. We might figure it out with somebody, but we can't figure it out on our own. We can't figure it out for someone else. And I think the other thing is to think when we're thinking Sabbath, What does Sabbath look like at different times in ministry, different times in life? Right? There are times, there are times when people are struggling with something, when they're in grieving, that they need a really deep Sabbath. They may need a sabbatical, right? To rest and be renewed. And there are times when there is a crisis going on, that the Sabbath may be a 10-minute nap and prayer. That's the Sabbath. But knowing that a crisis is a brief period. If we are always in crisis and we cannot give that time to God and to rest, then there's something wrong. Right? Crises come and they go. So we want to think about that. So what I'm looking at, and I want to encourage us to think about, is how do we live out this commandment, right? And does it mean a day by day, hour by hour? Does it mean a full day of the week? How do we live out the commandment? And how do we take this gift? So just show of hands, how many of you grew up in a time where Sunday was Sabbath, that there was no work, that it was really Sabbath? Okay. So some of you have, and some of you haven't even experienced that. Okay. Right. How many of you now live in a time where that's what you see around you? Right. Times have changed. Okay. You all know this total work life, right? Okay. So here's the trick. When we're in ministry, it's pretty hard to have Sunday be the Sabbath. I mean, it's a day of worship. It's a day to give to God. And it may be the day you work the most. Lay, clergy, whatever, right? Doesn't mean we don't need Sabbath. Okay. So the forms have changed. Sabbath has changed. Our needs have changed. And I think that's a reality for Sabbath. The other thing that we can't not mention is the role of communication and media. So when I said my father worked 7 days a week and yet found time for Sabbath every day and on Sunday, he also, when he came home from work, nobody texted him. He didn't have there was no email, right? He wasn't getting any dings. They called him if there was an emergency, which was very rare. So when he rested, he rested. When you were home, you were home. When you were at work, you were at work. So those boundaries were so much clearer and cleaner. So what it means is, since they're not now, we have to set our own, right? And that comes with the challenges. So I want to talk just for a moment about 7 kinds of rest. Okay, there's a great little TED talk, if you're interested, by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith about the 7 kinds of rest. I think as we think about Sabbath and rest and renewal, it's important to think about all of them. So one is, of course, the physical rest, right? One is mental rest. And by mental, I don't mean emotional. I'll get to that in a minute. But mental rest, not having your mind working through problems and thinking and just kind of a mental pause, which is hard to get with so much stimuli that we have today. The other is a sensory rest, which may be senses from screens and lights and sounds. And again, we all have different needs. Some people, a lot of stimulation is fine. Others, it's not. Okay, so again, bring in my Adirondack time. There's a lot of quiet up there. So when I used to commute and didn't work here in my little home office, I got on the train, I put my noise canceling, earphones on, got my book, and it was quiet. And I needed that, right? Other people, they need the noise, but we got to figure out what is that sensory overload for us. And I'll come to that in a minute. The other is creative rest, which is rest from having to create, and also rest in a way that can stimulate kind of an inner creation energy. And I'll talk about each of them in a little more depth. The other, of course, is emotional rest. Okay, not needing to not feeling a high level of emotions with any emotion, but needing a quieting of the emotions. So we need emotional rest. Social rest, Have any of you ever gone to a church function and thought, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, never want to see another person forever? Well, maybe till the next social, okay, right? And some people may come back from those socials and like, this is great, I can't wait to get up in the morning and see more people. But we all need a little of that social rest. And the other, of course, is spiritual rest, right? We need to be able to rest in God. Really allow God to support us, God to be in charge. Right? Nice if we could always be in a spiritual rest. And for all of us in ministry, a rest from having to be the spiritual guide, right? And really allowing others, lay, clergy, friends, family, to be our spiritual guides, to take over for us for a change. So I want to look at each of them and just see a little bit of kind of the trouble you get into when you don't have all these different kinds of rest. And as I do it, I encourage you to think for yourself, like, which of these areas do you think, okay, I kind of got that? And which of these areas you say, no, that's me. I need a little more work there. Okay. So physical rest. We know if we don't have physical rest, we really can end up with some serious physical problems, right? We all know that, right? That, high blood pressure, heart issues, on and on and on. We don't have adequate rest. Good sleep, good rest for our bodies. I know from sitting in this chair, if I keep going, and I don't rest, pretty soon I'm got sore shoulders, So we all need physical rest. So think to yourself, is that one you kind of got or not got? As I get older, I'm really in favor of those afternoon naps. I'm telling you, the science is behind them and they work. But anyway, okay, physical rest. And nothing like a good night's sleep to completely change things. And what does God want of us? What does God want of us? So the mental rest, when we don't give ourselves a mental pause, we can really lose our priorities. We can get stuck and not be able to work through problems. We can get repetitive. So these can be real problems in ministry when we just can't prioritize, like you've got a list to do and you can't think what's really important here for the church and what really isn't, because we haven't had that mental rest. Okay. Then sensory overload. When people have a sensory overload, anger comes up. It's just kind of comes with the territory. Up comes anger, irritation, frustration, can't focus. Not good for any of us, not good for ministry. Okay, creative rest, same thing. If creative rest can be really, for me, it is being in nature. For some people, it's listening to music, arranging flour, kneading bread, painting. You're maybe doing something creative, but you're in a restful state. And without it, again, boredom, blandness, depression. Anybody ever find out, like your sermons start, just bland? You don't even want to listen to them? Need kind of that something to rest in so that the creative spark can be rekindled. Emotional rest, of course, I work with this a lot, with folks. Without the emotional rest, people really, the anxiety goes up, depression goes up, trouble in relationships. People go to the wrong people to get comfort, wrong people to complain to. They're not going to their peers to work things out. They're going to somebody in the parish and complaining. It really, gets a feeling of that anxiety and depression and almost a sense of like at wit's end. And of course, the other thing here, in comes addictions, overuse of alcohol or food or just media, right? And so as I'm thinking about it, think for yourselves and think for the people that you're ministering to, because we want to also be Sabbath for us and be examples of Sabbath. I mean, I could actually go on a soapbox about this, because I work with so many people who are so stressed by this total work life. I mean, I want us all to rest in God and find Sabbath and, help the people we work with to know the same. So I'm a little bit on a soapbox tonight. Bear with me. Okay, so social rest. Same thing. We need those rests from relationships. We need time by ourselves. We need to be, out of the fray to rekindle so that we, again, we don't lose sight of how to have a good relationship and where we put different things in different relationships. And we all know what happens when we don't give ourselves rest spiritually. We lose sight of, God's being the center of our life. We think we're all alone. We have to work out this life on our own. Right? So I'm sure you know as much about that as I do about the spiritual rest and the spiritual work. So I won't say more about that. So I want to do just one more little piece, and then I want us to be in talking. So I want us to think about what are the internal barriers to giving yourself a Sabbath, and what are the external barriers. Okay, so when we think internal, some of the barriers, and I'll share about myself. Some are ambition, thinking that I've got to do it all. Right? If I don't get it done, who's going to do it? Right? Sometimes it's easier to work than deal with something else. Maybe if I pause and take a Sabbath, I might begin to think about what's the spiritual work I really need to do. If I just keep working, I don't have to deal with that. There can often be in ministry, and I see this so much across the board and in myself too, this overdeveloped sense of duty. I must do. And of course, when we get in that space, we don't take the Sabbath to really let God guide us or to rest so that we can do what actually is on our plate and ours alone. And we also lose sight of how we share the work. Okay, so externals, we've already talked about some of them. One is the culture that says you should be working and doing all the time. You should be on call. I remember someone recently talking to me about something. They were on call for this. I said, are you a doctor? Are you like delivering babies? No. I said, well, what are you on call for? What is it? That what's going to happen if you don't, you're gone for, a few hours to, rest and relax and pray. I mean, it wasn't a chaplain who was in a hospital. It was, you're on call. But, there are external pressures from other people saying, you've got to be on call all the time. Okay. There may be also expectations from others about if you rest, you are lazy. She's resting, not working. Yeah. So pay attention to, expectations from others, right? Expectations from ourselves. Those are the internal, external pressures. Okay, I could keep on talking about research and all kinds of things, but I will pause here. And I'd love to hear from you all. And I'd love to hear if you have questions or to what you know about the Sabbath, what's working, what's getting in your way. So let's have a conversation.
Could you say a little?
Victor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trevor. Okay.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about the challenges of boundaries?
Okay. So can you be more specific? I could talk all day about boundaries.
All right.
Yeah.
You have off day on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And some member wants to get something from the office and they want to come over to the office. You just happen to live next door to the church.
Just so happened.
It's convenient. And you have to think, well, do I say come tomorrow? Or, I mean, and it doesn't seem as important to you as it seems to them. And therefore, you try not to trivialize their particular need.
Yeah.
And so you acquiesce.
So it's a great question. And I note all of the complexities of it, right? Like on one hand, it's not a big deal, right? Or it's really important to them. It's not such a big deal to me. Or then the other hand, wait a sec, this is my day off. Just because I live there doesn't mean nearby, doesn't mean I can be available, right? So I think with boundaries, you want to think really about setting like expectations for one, and this takes time. Like if for you, it is key. Some people can run over and do that and it does not interrupt them. Some people, it's a real interruption of their Sabbath day. Or they know they go into the church and all of a sudden they see other things they need to do. Or it turns out that person didn't just want this thing. They actually wanted an hour conversation with you, right? So it's much more complicated. So I think this is part of our work is setting the expectations for those that we work with and that we minister with of what we need. And then comes the hard work of keeping those boundaries, right? Which is saying no at times, right? Knowing when is a yes and when is it a no. And what I found as people do this over time, the expectations can really be a part of the life of a congregation. Pastor's on Sabbath today. Like I know the pastor needs to rest and to pray and to spend time with your family, do their hobby, if that's what it is. They need this time. I want to make sure to protect it. So over time, if you set the boundaries well and the expectations well, the congregation can help you keep your boundaries, actually. Or some members can really help you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yes, Vicky?
I had a question because I can be good at boundaries, but when there is an emotional attachment, for example, we missed a normal Easter. Mm-hmm. I was sure we'd have a normal Christmas. We didn't have a normal Christmas.
Right.
So that sense of everybody's expectations about what Christmas would be, even though we live streamed and did it beautifully and had beautiful music, I have to say, I felt like I failed. And I don't mean to say that. It's like, it's God's service, but it was really hard when it got to that emotional place to separate, doing it as a priest in God's holy house to everybody's expectations for Christmas are on me because it's a horrible time and everybody's angry and the president's being bad. It just felt awful, and it was fine, but I'm worried because Easter's coming again and I don't know what it's going to be like. And I want to do it better if we're still live streaming and not.
Yeah. Well, so Vicki, you're bringing up so many important things, right? Like one, that this time is so unusual, right? How do we can't, it's not business as usual in this time, right? So things that I really, you know how to do Easter, you know how to do Christmas really well. You know how to, provide and be with people and have these services, and then to have that cut off, that's huge, right? And then to deal with others' expectations. Whether they're thinking it or not, we know that people project onto leadership. You are there for me. You provide for me, right? And we do, and we don't, right? So I think some of it is, again, setting those expectations for ourselves. How do we go back to oh my God, this is so horrible that I cannot provide what I usually provide. Right? And that's almost needing a Sabbath, emotional Sabbath, spiritual Sabbath. God, where are you here? And dealing with our own expectations for ourselves and the expectations of others and balancing that. Yeah. And when we open up, who knows what the expectations will be then? How are we going to, we can't just turn a switch and all's back to normal. We may need more rest and more boundary setting at that point. So others of you, questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Yes, Kate.
Can't hear you.
Can you unmute?
There we
There
go.
you are.
Now I
There you
am.
go. Great.
Okay, so working off of Vicky's thoughts, one of the things, I'm a verger, and
Great.
one of the things about vergers is it's mostly hard to try and worship within the service because you're 10 steps ahead of everybody else.
Yep.
So one of the things that I've so much enjoyed, because I have very little work to do right now, although I'm also the Altar Guild and various other things. But we live stream, they record, we're doing morning prayers. So I really don't have a lot except for changing frontals, things like that. I have learned how to enjoy different services. For various reasons, I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I start across the pond at a few of my friends who are doing their services. And I work my
Nice.
way over to the Pacific Coast, ending in
Woo!
sometimes. But coming off of Vicky's of expectations of what parishioners want, one of the things that I found that I didn't get at Christmas that I thought would maybe help Vicky is tradition. At the big holidays, we want traditions. The music makes a difference and things like that. And I found if I had had more traditional music, yes, I'm a right one. I love right one. Yes, I could deal with right two, and that's okay. I miss the smells and bells more than anything else. But if I had the traditional hymns, it really would have made my day for that service. And some of these other places have them more than we did. And I think that's also what helped me with those other services sometimes. So at Easter and Christmas, maybe it is a time to really make sure you hit on the nose what those traditional hymns are to help bring back what used to be. And
So
maybe those expectations then will somehow be lightened and more enjoyable, even though we're having such a difficult time of things.
I really appreciate that, Kate, both the suggestion and also bringing in the importance of those traditional hymns, right? Those, I mean, there are times when that's what we need in our Sabbath. You know, I'm not even talking about the services, but what we need in our Sabbath. We need to know, like, what is it that is our tradition that we need? You know, is it music that we need to get right with God, to rest? You know, what are the traditions that we need to put in place, right? You know, there may be some of you that pray the daily office every day. There may be some of you that pray pieces of it. You know, that it's not the rhythm of the day without Compline is the day doesn't end right? Or the day without starting with prayer doesn't begin right. What are the traditions that we have that really we want to hold on to? They don't have to be rigid, but we pay attention to them because they, you know, create the framework for our day and our weeks and our life and our year. Some we get at church and some we build for ourselves. Yeah, appreciate that. So what about the rest of you? What are you thinking when you think Sabbath? And what is working for you that you want to share? Or what are the stumbling blocks that you probably have someone else in here that also is going through? Yes. You're about there.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Hi. I'm a deacon,
Jacqueline. Yes.
and I go to the hospitals and I chaplain. You know, I be with the patients, but that is so missed since I don't go. I'm not going in and out of the hospitals right now. I'm doing it virtually, but there's a big difference. So that need just to be with people, and I find myself even calling more and more people as if I'm not doing my ministry like that's missing. Like I feel like I'm doing something wrong because I can't go in at this time to the hospital.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that in. Yes, because when you can't don't have that human connection, can't do your ministry the way you've always done it.
Yeah.
That's a real burden, right? So for you, you really you don't need so much Sabbath rest as like Sabbath activity.
Yeah.
Sabbath connection. Yeah, very different need. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing that in. So key. Right. Mm-hmm.
Hi, man.
Yes.
You know, as a Latino, it's I don't know, kind of Victor, to know they have the same problem as a Latino we have, because for us to call, as I say, Sabbath, it's like when I take, but I try to do something during my days, but when I say, okay, let me take this hour for doing something for me. Mm-hmm. But my phone ring, if I not did answer, they may come to complain. Father, why you not answered my phone? It was I know people expecting the priest will be there right away. It's not there for us. Okay, wait, no. And this is my own experience. And say, what is my day? What is my time?
Right.
When the necessity of my people is totally different than the we say we are the same member of the church, where we are Episcopal, but when we come this cultural, it's totally different.
Yes, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. For me to, I remember I worked with when I was in Grace with Father Grace. I understand that we have, but as someone with the Latino community, I said, wow, it's not the same. It's more painful for me to say, okay, let me take this to me to rest. Then when I say, this is my spiritual moment, I try to do the best for me, for myself, for my family. And then sometimes my wife says, what is our time?
Well, I'm so glad you brought in the cultural piece, right? Because it is not one size fits all for individuals or communities or churches. Absolutely not. As a CPE educator, of course, I've had students from around the globe. I remember years ago having a Roman Catholic priest from India who lived in the rectory with a couple other priests. And he didn't have a family, of course, but he said they were expected literally to be on 24/7. People came and ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner with them if they wanted to. They might take a vacation and get away for a week, but if they were in the rectory, they were to be ministering. Okay? You couldn't say, but he found a way to get some time, if it was just to take a walk. He had to build a rhythm, but it was a very different rhythm than I am used to, right? I want that time, that quiet time, the boundary time. His boundary time was little bits here and there. And he was the kind of personality that could do that. Now, he had fellow priests who could not do that. It just wasn't sustainable for them, right? Because that's a hard life to live. So I think we need to think about, what do we need to sustain us as individuals? What does our community need? What are the expectations? And then how do we build the communication, so that we can take care of ourselves, meet other needs, and be clear about that, right? Which is going to look different in different places. Right? And as I said, sometimes the congregation can help you set your boundaries. Father needs his rest. Don't bother him. He is praying. We need him to be rested and prayerful for us. And there may be some people in the congregation who can be there, can be your champions.
Meg, there is something as well that is coming up from I think the field, and it's like particularly I see lay leaders and clergy carrying on their churches for 10 months now. We have been into this pandemic for
Yeah,
10 months,
yeah.
and then they've been like looking at them for answers to what to do on Sunday with online services, how to attend pastorally, how to respond to emails, how to, so like we have been in this moment of creative mode, but at the same time is now been 10 months,
Yes,
with this.
yeah.
And how do we stop this? Like how do we stop this kind of behavior? Because it's getting to the point where it's becoming unhealthy for the individual and the congregation.
Yeah.
And is this kind of the snowball effect, something that just start big and bigger and bigger and bigger, that there is no stopping to that at this moment.
Okay, so Victor, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You're saying that folks are just continually kind of working, trying to be creative, find new ways to do things, and it's just exhausting them. Is that right? Yeah. And it is so interesting as I'm, with some people who are actually finding this time generative. Wow, I'm getting to create things I never thought about before. And other people who are, it's overwhelming, right? And some people who are tanking right now and saying 10 months and like, I can't stand it. The other day I prepared the coffee at night, punched the coffee button in the morning. I said, it's like Groundhog's Day every day over and over again. There's a monotony to it. So that can get people down. But okay, so I think right now we're in an unusual time. So then we think, what do we do in unusual times? Right? For me, I think, okay, what are the structures? What are the rituals that support us that we want to put back in place, particularly in difficult times, particularly in unusual times?
Meigs, one of the things that
Kate, I want to hear from you just 1 minute, but I think part of it, I just want to address one more thing, Victor, is I think part of it is also back to the boundaries and the expectations. Like, it's not going to be business as usual. You can't meet everybody's needs, right? And then what are the rituals, rhythms that support us? Kate, you want to get in? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I found that because I wasn't setting time for myself in many respects, I started setting appointments for myself to do things. Everyone wants to have an appointment with clergy or lay to do something. Well, sometimes you need to set an appointment to do something to help yourself.
It's a great idea.
It's a workshop, whether it's I take pictures at cemeteries and I try and squeeze it in to, I've got 5 pictures to take. It'll take me a half an hour. I'm going to do it on the way to another appointment or somewhere else I have to go.
Great idea.
Setting the appointment, I even do it for exercise sometimes, because if I didn't, people cut in. I started reacting very badly when I don't get my me time. And I know it. I've learned the triggers. So it's really, and sometimes you have to say, you know what? I'm really sorry, but right now I have something I have to take care of.
Beautiful. You schedule it in and you say, I'm sorry, I have an appointment.
Yeah.
The appointment may be to take a walk. It's your appointment, right? That's when you begin to prioritize. Am I going to be good for anybody if I don't get my walk? Am I going to be able to be creative at all if I don't take this time away? Right? Is my family going to be there in 10 months if I don't spend time with them? Right? I was reading some articles. It was interesting. There's a man who had a large church, different denomination, and he had lots of clergy on staff, and he told them they could work 45 hours a week, and they could go to 2 meetings during the week, evenings. That was it. And he told all their spouses, if your spouse works more than 45 hours a week or goes to more than 2 evening meetings, you're to call me. That, talk about boundaries. That was pretty strict boundaries. He said, and they would call and say, my wife or husband was out 3 nights this week. and they're working, 60 hours. And he said what he would then do is see, are the expectations of their job beyond what you can do in 45 hours? And if they are, we need to change the job description. It wasn't like a blaming thing. Or is there something else that is more of an internal barrier that's keeping them from keeping to the schedule? So they would really take that as an opportunity to take a look at things. So you may set that for yourself. This is how many hours I'm going to work. This is, how many evenings, and then do a little research and see, are you keeping to that? And as we know, sometimes you can think you've worked all day, and what you've done is you've worked half the day, and the other day, part of the day you've worried or fretted or, checked the news, and then you need kind of a reset button. Right? Yeah.
There is as well an expectation nowadays of I am paid to be busy, and it's even as clergy right now or lay leaders is I'm paid to be busy, to be doing something. Mm-hmm. So whenever I'm not doing something, I'm like feeling that I'm stealing people's money, because it's like, they're paying me to do this and I'm not doing anything, or that sense of guilt, and then the expectation is put there that because I'm paid, I'm supposed to be busy doing something, and it that kind of bring the conflict as well of boundaries and all this, because it's already into a contract as well.
Right, and there's that, again, it goes back to this total work life, right? That we have to be busy working, even in ministry, making the money kind of thing, or proving our worth.
And especially if you live in a rectory. They've bought you.
You're theirs, right?
They're there.
Right.
Next to the church. Next
to the church, right. So how do you make Sabbath keeping part of what you do? Oh, yes, you pay me to be, your priest, your deacon, your minister. This is what I do. This Sabbath is part of what I do. Again, if you go to the research, it's fabulous they say that the companies that work longer hours are not usually, the workers are not necessarily more productive. So they end up tending to do more work that is not necessary. There's a great quote about it. I wish I had it, but I don't have it. Yes, here it is. Here you go. Keep overworking and you'll progressively work more stupidly on tasks that are increasingly meaningless. So if you keep working harder, you can't keep it up. You'll be working more stupidly on more meaningless tasks.
Can you read it again?
Yes. This is for an article called Health and Wholeness for Church Leaders. And it says the article summarized its findings that overwork doesn't work and said, keep overworking and you'll progressively work more stupidly on tasks that are increasingly meaningless. So the difference in work output between employees who actually worked 80 hours a week and those who pretended they did were the same. Because there's only so much work we can actually do. And there's only so much work we can actually do well. And all of us, our bodies, our minds, our spirits, need rest and relaxation and that gift of the Sabbath. So.
Thank you.
Meg, I think now in kind of reaching the end of this conversation, this is something that, again, is a sign of the times. Right now, we are in the midst of so much that is calling our attention. But then somebody was saying, this morning, he was saying this is about survival nowadays. There's not a choice, it's survival. It's how we are going to get through all of this at the end of the tunnel and see that we are full of life and not full of resentment at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. I appreciate that, not full of life and not resentment. And I think it's tricky when we're saying survival, right? Like right now we have to survive. But we think when we're in survival mode, that is a brief period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think over pandemic, we've moved from survival to this is our life at the moment.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we're not quite in survival mode anymore.
Mhm.
We're getting tired of this new way of living.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if we stay in survival only mode,
Mhm.
we won't give ourselves, like when you're surviving, you're in a crisis, you don't need much rest.
Right.
10 months, we need rest. We can't keep going at this pace. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Meg, thank you for inviting us to this conversation. It's been great and such a blessing and so timely. I think it's so timely. This is the time to be talking about this, especially with Ash Wednesday around the corner. And
Yes. Yeah.
corner, and that tendency that we need to be doing so much for everyone and not ourselves at this moment. And
Right.
thank you for that, and thank everyone for your participation and your questions and being here. And we have been challenged, and we have been invited to remember the commandments of God as well into this our own lives and what we do as ministers, as lay leaders and priests as well. So, thank you, Meg, and
My pleasure, and wonderful to be with all of you. And I wish you, as my Jewish friend said, a good Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you, Ken Victor, for arranging this. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
God
Okay.
bless you.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. See you.